You will marry the black woman in town or spend 6 months in territorial prison, the sheriff declares as the towering mountain man stands shackled before the crowded saloon. The townspeople sneer at this wild giant, certain he'll choose exile over such humiliation. They expect him to flee into his beloved wilderness rather than submit to civilized punishment. But the dignified widow who runs the herb shop becomes an unwilling pawn in their cruel game. Behind her calm exterior lies dangerous intelligence that could transform this barbaric sentence into something neither the mountain man nor the scheming town council anticipated. What they don't realize is that forcing these two outcasts together might unleash a power that could shatter every assumption about race, marriage, and who truly controls this frontier town. Will their union destroy them both, or will it become the weapon that brings justice to a corrupt community? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The mountain peaks of Colorado Territory stretched endlessly beyond Clearwater Junction as Luther Grant guided his pack mules down the dusty main street. Autumn of 1869 brought the promise of harsh winter, and the massive fur trapper needed supplies before retreating to his cabin for the cold months ahead. His weathered face and bear-like frame drew stares from townspeople who whispered behind lace curtains and wooden storefronts. Luther had made this journey twice yearly for 5 years, trading pelts for flour, ammunition, and tools. The town tolerated his presence because his furs brought good money, but they never welcomed him. To them, he remained a wild thing that belonged in the mountains, not among civilized folk. Near the mercantile, a commotion caught his attention. 3 men in clean suits surrounded a woman outside a small shop with painted wooden signs advertising herbs and remedies. The woman stood perfectly straight, her dark skin gleaming in the afternoon sun, her dress neat and proper despite the harassment. "Your kind shouldn't be treating white children," one man spat. "Pack up and move on before something unfortunate happens." The woman's voice remained steady. "My medicines work. Your children are healthier because of them." "Don't talk back." Another man stepped closer. "We're being generous, giving you any warning at all." Luther had seen enough. His boots thudded against the wooden planks as he approached. The 3 men turned, suddenly aware of his imposing presence. At 6 feet 4 inches and 250 pounds of muscle and scars, Luther commanded attention without saying a word. "The lady seems to be conducting business," Luther said quietly. "You gentlemen have somewhere else to be." The leader of the group, a thin man with a gold watch chain, puffed up his chest. "This doesn't concern you, mountain man. Best move along." "I'm making it my concern." The woman looked between Luther and her tormentors, her intelligent eyes calculating the shifting dynamics. She possessed the kind of quiet dignity that came from years of facing adversity with grace. "We'll remember this," the thin man warned before leading his companions away. Luther touched his hat brim toward the woman. "Ma'am." "Thank you," she replied. "That was kind but unnecessary. I can handle such men." "Didn't doubt it, just evened the odds some." Her lips curved slightly upward. "Celia Boudreau. I run the herb shop." "Luther Grant." "The fur trapper. I've heard stories. Don't believe half of them." "Which half should I believe?" Luther almost smiled. "The half about me minding my own business." Their conversation ended when Sheriff Calhoun appeared, his badge catching the late sunlight. Behind him walked Mayor Cross and Dr. Whitman, the town's established physician. Their expressions suggested this meeting was no coincidence. "Grant," the sheriff nodded. "Heard you caused some trouble." "Heard wrong. 3 respected citizens say otherwise. They claim you threatened them." Luther's jaw tightened. The trap was being set, and he recognized the signs too late. In the mountains, danger announced itself with honest growls and bared claws. Here, it wore suits and badges. "I defended a lady's right to conduct business." "That's not how they tell it." Mayor Cross stepped forward, his politician's smile cold as winter wind. "Now, Sheriff, let's be reasonable. Mr. Grant simply doesn't understand our ways. Perhaps some time in civilized company would benefit everyone. Dr. Whitman nodded agreement. Education in proper behavior seems warranted. Celia watched the exchange with growing understanding. These men had orchestrated this confrontation, used her situation to trap the mountain man. The question was why? "Luther Grant," Sheriff Calhoun announced loudly, drawing attention from passers-by. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and making threats against citizens." "What threats?" "You can explain it to the territorial judge. He'll be through in 6 months." 6 months in jail meant missing the entire trapping season. Luther's livelihood depended on those winter pelts. The sheriff knew this, just as he knew Luther had made no real threats. "However," Mayor Cross interjected, "the town council might consider an alternative arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" The mayor's smile widened. "Marriage, Mr. Grant. 1 year of married life in town, learning proper social conduct. The council believes domestic responsibility might civilize your rougher edges." "Marriage to who?" "Why, to Miss Boudreau, of course. She's the only unmarried woman of appropriate age." Celia's composure cracked for the first time. "Excuse me?" "It's perfect," Dr. Whitman added. "2 problems solved with 1 solution. Mr. Grant learns civilized behavior, and you gain a husband's protection and guidance. I neither need nor want a husband." "The business license you need for your shop suggests otherwise," Mayor Cross replied smoothly. "Unmarried women of your background face certain restrictions in territorial law." The threat was clear: marry Luther or lose everything she had built. Celia's hands remained steady at her sides, but Luther caught the slight tightening around her eyes. 6 months in jail or 1 year married, Sheriff Calhoun declared. "Choose now." Luther looked at Celia, then at the 3 men who had manipulated them both into this corner. The townspeople gathered closer, eager for entertainment at their expense. The mountain man had faced grizzly bears and mountain lions, survived blizzards that killed grown men, but this moment felt more dangerous than any wilderness threat. These civilized men wielded law and social pressure like weapons, and they had aimed both directly at him and the dignified woman beside him. 1 year, Luther said finally. Celia closed her eyes briefly, then nodded once. The trap had closed around them both. The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later in the town square, designed more for public spectacle than sacred vows. Reverend Mitchell rushed through the words while townspeople gathered in clusters, whispering and pointing. Luther wore his cleanest shirt and freshly shaved face, but still looked like a wild animal in costume. Celia appeared in a simple blue dress, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. "You may kiss the bride," the Reverend announced. Luther and Celia exchanged a brief, awkward peck that satisfied no one, least of all themselves. The crowd dispersed with satisfied murmurs, already placing bets on how quickly the arrangement would collapse. Toby Morris lingered near his newspaper office, scribbling notes in his leather journal. The young editor sensed a story worth following, though he couldn't yet see its true shape. Celia's home sat behind her herb shop, a modest 2-room structure with whitewashed walls and carefully tended gardens. Luther deposited his few possessions in the main room, while Celia retreated to her bedroom, closing the door with deliberate finality. The first week passed in painful politeness. Luther slept on the floor near the fireplace, rising before dawn to avoid disturbing his new wife. Celia prepared meals in silence, serving Luther his portion before eating alone in her room. They moved around each other like cautious animals sharing disputed territory. Luther's mountain-bred instincts felt suffocated by walls and routine. He missed the endless sky, the honest dangers of wilderness life. Here, threats wore friendly faces and struck from shadows. Every morning brought the urge to saddle his horse and ride toward the peaks, but his word bound him tighter than any chain. Celia maintained her herb shop with professional efficiency, treating customers who came seeking remedies for ailments ranging from fever to heartbreak. Some patrons glanced toward the back room, wondering about her strange new husband, but she offered no explanations. The second week brought their first real interaction. Luther discovered Celia reading by lamplight, surrounded by medical texts and botanical journals. The sight stopped him short. Books covered every surface of her room, more volumes than he'd seen outside a territorial courthouse. "You collect books." "I study them." Luther examined the nearest spine, struggling with the complex words. "Medical practices of European universities." "Can you read?" Heat flooded Luther's face. "Some. Not much past basic words." Celia set down her current volume, studying his expression. "There's no shame in that. Most men your age never had opportunity for formal education. Mountain doesn't care if you can read Shakespeare. Only matters if you can read weather and track signs. What can you read in nature?" Luther's embarrassment faded as he entered familiar territory. "Storm coming tomorrow afternoon. Big one, from the northwest. That oak tree by your garden is sick, probably root rot. The herbs growing near your back fence are stronger than the ones by the road because the soil drains better." Celia followed his gaze out the window, seeing her familiar surroundings through different eyes. "How do you know about the storm?" "Wind patterns changed this morning. Pressure's dropping. Animals are acting different." "And the oak tree?" "Leaves are wrong color for this time of year. Bark's got stress marks." She stood and pulled a thick volume from her shelf. "This book discusses plant diseases. Would you like to see the section on root rot?" Luther hesitated, then nodded. Celia opened the book to detailed illustrations of diseased trees, their root systems exposed and labeled. Luther leaned closer, his large frame dwarfing the delicate furniture. The pictures matched exactly what he'd observed in her oak tree. "The symptoms progress in stages," Celia explained. "Early intervention can sometimes save the tree." "How?" She turned pages, revealing treatment methods. Luther absorbed every word, his remarkable memory cataloging information with startling efficiency. When she finished reading, he asked intelligent questions that revealed deep understanding of plant biology, even without formal terminology. "You have an exceptional mind," Celia said quietly. "Just practical knowledge." "No." "You understand complex relationships between plants, soil, and environment." "That's scientific thinking." Luther had never considered his wilderness skills as science, but Celia's words sparked something long dormant. As a child, he'd been curious about everything, asking endless questions until life's hardships forced practicality over learning. "Would you teach me to read better?" "Why?" "These books contain knowledge I can use. Plant medicines, weather patterns, animal behavior, things that matter." Celia studied his face, searching for mockery or false interest. She found only genuine hunger for knowledge. "We could start with basic medical texts. Your plant knowledge would help you understand the concepts." That night, their first real lesson began. Celia selected a simple botanical guide, pointing to words while Luther repeated them. His progress was remarkable. Within an hour, he was reading entire sentences about medicinal herbs he already knew from the mountains. "Willow bark contains compounds that reduce fever and pain," Luther read slowly. "You've used willow bark?" "Many times. Didn't know the why of it, just that it worked." "Understanding the science makes you more effective." Luther looked up from the book, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since their wedding. "You're a good teacher. You're a good student." Something shifted between them in that moment. Not romance, but the beginning of genuine respect. Celia saw intelligence beneath Luther's rough exterior. Luther glimpsed the generous spirit behind Celia's protective reserve. Outside, the first drops of rain began falling. Exactly as Luther had predicted. The storm was coming, but inside the small house, two people had found the first flickering spark of understanding. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Luther sat hunched over Celia's kitchen table, carefully reading aloud from a medical journal. The lamplight cast shadows across his weathered features as he pronounced each syllable with deliberate precision. "The alkaloids present in digitalis purpurea demonstrate significant cardiac benefits when administered in controlled doses, but excessive consumption can result in fatal toxicity." Celia looked up from her mortar and pestle, surprise flickering across her face. "Read that again." Luther repeated the complex passage flawlessly, his understanding evident in his inflection and emphasis. The mountain man who had struggled with basic words a month ago now grasped advanced medical terminology with startling clarity. "You comprehended every word." "Foxglove," Luther said simply. "Seen it growing wild in high meadows. Never knew it could heal hearts or kill a man depending on the amount." Most physicians struggle with those concepts. Luther set the journal aside and met her gaze. Most physicians never had to watch someone die because they were too ignorant to help. The pain in his voice made Celia pause her grinding. In the weeks of their evening lessons, Luther had revealed pieces of his past like scattered puzzle fragments. Tonight felt different, as if some invisible barrier was finally crumbling. "Tell me," she said gently. Luther's massive hands clenched and unclenched on the table. "Had a wife once. Sarah. Little girl named Emma, barely 3 years old. This was before I went to the mountains permanent." Celia set down her tools and gave him her full attention. "Winter fever took them both. I watched them burn up with sickness, begging me to make it stop. Rode 2 days to fetch the nearest doctor, but he couldn't come for a week. By then, they were both gone." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared understanding of loss. "I knew nothing about medicine, about healing. Just watched my family die because I was useless. That's when I took to the mountains. Figured if I was going to be alone, might as well be alone where my ignorance couldn't hurt anyone else." Celia's voice was barely a whisper. "What kind of fever?" "Started with headaches, then chills that wouldn't stop. High temperature that wouldn't break. Willow bark tea would have helped with the fever, cool compresses, plenty of water. Simple things that might have made the difference. That's why I want to learn everything in these books. Every remedy, every treatment won't be helpless again." Celia felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This wasn't just a man seeking basic literacy. This was someone driven by the deepest kind of purpose, transformed by love and loss into something far more complex than the town imagined. "What about you?" Luther asked. "Why did you come west?" Celia returned to her grinding, the rhythmic motion helping her organize difficult memories. "I was married too. Thomas Boudreau, a brilliant man who believed education could change the world. He insisted I attend college in Boston. Said intelligent women were the future of medicine." "That's where you learned all this?" "Medical theory, botany, chemistry. I was one of 3 women in my classes. The professors tolerated us because Thomas had connections, but they never believed we belonged there." Luther watched her face as she spoke, seeing the ghost of old battles fought in lecture halls and laboratories. "Thomas enlisted when the war started. Said freedom meant nothing if not everyone could share it. He died at Antietam, fighting for principles that cost him everything. So you came here. Came west because Eastern society would never let a woman like me practice medicine. Out here, competence matters more than convention. Or so I hoped." They sat in comfortable silence. 2 people who had found each other through manipulation, but discovered genuine connection through shared purpose. The evening lessons had become the highlight of both their days, intellectual partnership replacing the awkward politeness of their early weeks. "Try this passage," Celia said, opening a different journal to a marked page. Luther leaned over the text, his shoulder brushing hers as they shared the lamplight. "The therapeutic application of botanical compounds requires precise understanding of dosage, timing, and individual patient physiology. The practitioner must combine scientific knowledge with intuitive assessment of each unique case." Perfect pronunciation. Do you understand the meaning? Healing isn't just about knowing which plants work. It's about knowing how much to use, when to use it, and reading each person's individual needs. Exactly. That intuitive assessment comes from experience, from really seeing your patients as individuals rather than collections of symptoms. Luther turned toward her, their faces suddenly very close in the intimate circle of lamplight. "You see people that way." really see them. So do you. In the mountains, you learn to read signs most people miss. That's the same skill, applied to human beings instead of weather patterns. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. This close, she could see the intelligence blazing behind his eyes, the transformation that weeks of learning had wrought in his entire bearing. He was no longer the rough mountain man who had defended her in the street. He had become something entirely new. "Celia," he said softly. She didn't pull away when he leaned closer. Their first real kiss was nothing like the perfunctory peck at their forced wedding. This was fire and recognition, the meeting of two minds that had found perfect intellectual harmony and discovered it could become something far more powerful. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. "That changes things," Luther said. "Everything," Celia agreed. Outside, the town of Clearwater Junction slept peacefully, unaware that their punishment had just transformed into something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, learning, and the true measure of a person's worth. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Within days of Luther and Celia's first kiss, the entire dynamic of their partnership shifted into something the town hadn't expected. Luther began spending his mornings gathering rare plants from the mountain slopes, returning with specimens Celia had only read about in her medical texts. Their herb shop expanded rapidly as they combined his wilderness expertise with her scientific knowledge. Mrs. Henderson arrived first, clutching her arthritic hands against her chest. Luther had prepared a willow bark and wintergreen compound that reduced her pain more effectively than anything Dr. Whitman had prescribed. She left singing their praises to anyone who would listen. Word spread quickly through Clearwater Junction. The Johnson family brought their colicky baby, desperate after sleepless weeks. Celia's chamomile and fennel mixture, enhanced with mountain herbs Luther had identified, solved the problem in 2 days. The Millers came seeking help for their son's persistent cough. Luther's high-altitude pine needle preparation cleared the boy's lungs completely. Dr. Whitman watched this growing success with increasing alarm. His practice had dominated the town's medical needs for 15 years, and these newcomers threatened everything he'd built. He began visiting Mayor Cross and Sheriff Calhoun with disturbing frequency, their conversations conducted behind closed doors with hushed urgency. "This is getting out of hand," Dr. Whitman told his conspirators during one such meeting. "Half the town is seeking treatment from that woman and her trained mountain man." Mayor Cross paced his office, agitation clear in his rapid movements. The marriage was supposed to humiliate them both, drive them out of town. Instead, they're becoming more established every day. Sheriff Calhoun cleaned his revolver with nervous precision. "People are starting to respect them. That wasn't part of the plan." "Then we change the plan," Dr. Whitman said coldly. "Make their success impossible to maintain." The sabotage started small. Celia discovered her morning glory flowers trampled, the plants she used for heart medications destroyed overnight. Luther found his carefully organized herb stores scattered and contaminated with dirt. Someone had broken into their storage shed, mixing harmless and dangerous plants together in ways that could prove fatal if used incorrectly. "This isn't random vandalism," Luther observed, examining the deliberate chaos. "Someone knows enough about plants to make this look accidental while creating real danger." Celia surveyed the damage with growing anger. "They're trying to force us into making mistakes that could hurt our patients. Or trying to make us too afraid to practice medicine at all." Toby Morris appeared in their doorway, notebook in hand and concern creasing his young face. "Heard about the break-in. This is the 3rd incident this week." "You've been keeping track?" Celia asked. "I keep track of everything interesting in this town, and what's happening to you two is very interesting." Luther studied the earnest newspaper editor. "What do you think we should do?" "Document everything. Take photographs of the damage. Keep detailed records. Truth has a way of surfacing if you preserve the evidence." The harassment escalated when Celia found a threatening letter slipped under their door. The crude handwriting warned her to stop treating white children or face serious consequences. Luther discovered his horse had been deliberately spooked and nearly injured, saved only by his quick reflexes and mountain-trained instincts. Despite the intimidation, patients continued arriving. The pregnant Miller daughter came seeking help with severe morning sickness. Old Pete Johnson needed treatment for an infected wound that wasn't healing properly. The widow Patterson brought her grandson, who suffered from terrible nightmares following his parents' death. Luther and Celia treated each case with growing confidence and competence. Their partnership had evolved into something remarkable. Luther could identify and gather any plant Celia needed, while she transformed raw materials into precisely measured medications. He had learned to read not just medical texts, but human nature, observing patients with the same careful attention he'd once reserved for tracking animals. "You're becoming a real physician," Celia told him one evening as they prepared treatments for the next day's appointments, learning from the best teacher. Their relationship had deepened beyond intellectual partnership into genuine love. They moved together with the synchronized precision of people who understood each other completely. Luther's rough edges had been smoothed by education and purpose, while Celia's guarded nature had opened under the warmth of true appreciation and respect. The crisis came when little Emma Watson developed a high fever that Dr. Whitman couldn't break. Her desperate parents brought the 5-year-old to Luther and Celia as a last resort. The child's symptoms matched exactly what Luther remembered from his own daughter's final illness years before. "Willow bark tea for the fever," Celia decided. "Cool compresses every hour. And that high mountain herb you found last week, the one similar to echinacea." Luther prepared the treatments with steady hands, but his eyes revealed the emotional weight of the moment. This was his chance to save a child the way he'd been unable to save his own daughter. They worked through the night, taking turns monitoring Emma's temperature and adjusting treatments. By dawn, the fever had broken. The little girl opened her eyes and asked for water in a clear, strong voice. Mrs. Watson wept with gratitude. "You saved her life." Word of Emma's recovery spread through town like wildfire. Even families who had been skeptical of Luther and Celia's methods began reconsidering. But their success also intensified the opposition from those who saw their growing influence as a threat to the established order. Dr. Whitman's face had turned dark with rage when he heard about Emma Watson's recovery. The conspiracy against Luther and Celia was about to enter its most dangerous phase. The diphtheria outbreak began on a Tuesday morning, when the Carpenter twins developed the telltale sore throats and swollen necks. By Wednesday, 6 more children showed symptoms. Dr. Whitman prescribed his standard treatments of laudanum and bloodletting, but the children only grew weaker. Panic gripped Clearwater Junction as parents watched their offspring struggle to breathe through inflamed throats. The disease spread with terrifying speed through the schoolhouse and surrounding homes. Dr. Whitman worked frantically, but his methods seemed powerless against the advancing illness. Desperate families began arriving at Luther and Celia's door, despite Dr. Whitman's warnings about unproven folk remedies. The first was Maria Santos, carrying her gasping 4-year-old son. "Please," she begged. "Dr. Whitman says there's nothing more he can do." Celia examined the boy's throat while Luther prepared a steam treatment with pine needles and wild sage. The combination of his mountain knowledge and her medical training had identified plants that could reduce throat inflammation and ease breathing difficulties. "Keep him upright," Celia instructed. "The steam treatment every 2 hours. This willow bark tea will control the fever." Within hours, the child's breathing improved dramatically. Word spread quickly, and more families arrived seeking help. Luther worked tirelessly, gathering fresh pine boughs and wild herbs while Celia prepared treatments with scientific precision. Dr. Whitman watched his patients defect to the herb shop with growing fury. Mayor Cross received increasingly agitated visits from the town's established physician, who demanded immediate action to stop what he called dangerous medical malpractice. "They're undermining legitimate medicine," Dr. Whitman ranted. "People will die because of their primitive remedies." But children treated by Luther and Celia recovered faster than those under Dr. Whitman's care. The evidence was impossible to ignore, even for the town's most prejudiced residents. Toby Morris documented everything with meticulous care. His photographs showed the stark contrast between children treated with traditional bloodletting and those who received herbal therapies. His interviews with grateful parents painted a clear picture of superior results from the unconventional partnership. The breaking point came during a town meeting called to address the medical crisis. Dr. Whitman stood before the assembled citizens, his face flushed with indignation and desperation. "These people are practicing medicine without proper credentials," he declared. "Their success is pure luck, and it won't last. When children start dying from their untested remedies, who will take responsibility?" Luther rose from the back of the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. The mountain man who had once struggled with basic reading now spoke with quiet authority. "Every child treated with our methods has recovered completely. Can Dr. Whitman say the same?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd as parents exchanged meaningful glances. The evidence was undeniable. Mayor Cross stood quickly, sensing the mood shifting dangerously against their interests. "The question isn't about individual cases, but about proper medical authority. We can't have unlicensed practitioners undermining our established institutions." "Even when those institutions are failing our children?" asked Mrs. Watson, whose daughter Emma had been saved by Luther and Celia's intervention. Toby Morris stood slowly, his notebook clutched in steady hands. "I've been investigating the harassment Luther and Celia have faced, the vandalism, the contaminated medicines, the threatening letters. What I discovered might surprise everyone." Dr. Whitman went pale. "This isn't the time for newspaper sensationalism." "It's exactly the time for truth," Toby replied. He opened his notebook and began reading documented evidence. The plant contamination was too precise to be random vandalism. Someone with detailed botanical knowledge deliberately mixed healing herbs with poisonous varieties. Sheriff Calhoun shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's a serious accusation without proof." "I have proof." Toby produced a series of photographs showing footprints, broken locks, and scattered plants. "These images tell a story of systematic sabotage designed to discredit Luther and Celia's medical practice." The crowd leaned forward, hungry for answers that explained the strange incidents plaguing the couple everyone was beginning to respect. "Furthermore," Toby continued, "I've discovered financial irregularities in our town's accounts. Money that should have gone to medical supplies and public health improvements has been mysteriously redirected." Mayor Cross jumped to his feet. "This meeting is about the diphtheria outbreak, not wild conspiracy theories." "The two are connected," Toby said firmly. "The sabotage was designed to discredit effective medical treatment while covering up the theft of funds meant to protect public health." Dr. Whitman's face had turned ashen. "These accusations are ridiculous." "I demand this young man be removed from the meeting." "Let him finish," called out Mr. Henderson, whose wife's arthritis had been cured by Luther and Celia's treatments. Toby pulled out his final piece of evidence, a detailed financial ledger. "Sheriff Calhoun has been embezzling town funds for months. Dr. Whitman helped cover up the theft by sabotaging alternative medical treatments that might expose his incompetence. Mayor Cross orchestrated the whole scheme, including the forced marriage designed to humiliate and ultimately drive away two people whose success threatened their corruption." The meeting erupted in angry voices and shouted questions. Parents who had watched their children recover under Luther and Celia's care now understood the full scope of the conspiracy against them. Sheriff Calhoun reached for his weapon. But Luther moved with surprising speed for such a large man. He grabbed the sheriff's wrist, applying pressure with the precise control of someone who understood anatomy and leverage. The gun clattered harmlessly to the floor. "No violence," Luther said quietly. "Truth is weapon enough." The territorial marshal, summoned by Toby's earlier telegram, entered the meeting hall at that exact moment. Justice had finally arrived in Clearwater Junction. Marshal Thompson's weathered face surveyed the chaotic town meeting with professional calm. He had received Toby Morris's telegram 3 days earlier, requesting investigation into official corruption and medical malpractice. The scene before him confirmed every suspicion outlined in the young editor's detailed report. "Sheriff Calhoun, Mayor Cross, Dr. Whitman," the marshal announced. "You're all under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, and endangering public health." Dr. Whitman broke first under pressure. I only contaminated their supplies because they were practicing medicine illegally. Someone had to protect this town from their dangerous treatments. By nearly killing children with your sabotage? Luther asked quietly. My methods are proven and scientific. Your methods failed every child during the diphtheria outbreak, Celia observed. Our supposed folk remedies saved lives you couldn't. The crowd murmured agreement. Parents who had watched Luther and Celia heal their children while Dr. Whitman's treatments failed now understood the full scope of the conspiracy against effective medical care. Marshal Thompson examined Toby's evidence with thorough attention. The financial records, photographs, and witness statements painted a clear picture of systematic corruption designed to maintain power while endangering lives. The territorial court will handle formal proceedings, he announced. But based on this evidence, all 3 men will face serious charges. Sheriff Calhoun made one last desperate attempt to draw his backup weapon, but Luther intercepted the motion with precise efficiency. His mountain-trained reflexes and newly acquired knowledge of human anatomy allowed him to subdue the corrupt lawman without causing injury. Violence won't solve anything, Luther said, helping the defeated sheriff to his feet. The town elected Deputy Harrison as interim sheriff that same evening. The young man had watched Luther and Celia's transformation with growing respect, and his first official act was to formally recognize their medical practice as legitimate and beneficial to community health. Within weeks, their reputation spread beyond Clearwater Junction. Families traveled from neighboring towns seeking treatments that combined scientific knowledge with natural remedies. Luther's ability to identify and gather rare medicinal plants, combined with Celia's precise preparation methods, created a medical practice unlike anything the territory had seen. The financial recovery happened quickly once the embezzled funds were recovered and properly allocated. New medical supplies arrived, along with updated textbooks that Luther devoured with the same intensity he had once applied to tracking game through mountain wilderness. You've become quite the scholar, Celia observed one evening, finding him absorbed in a complex pharmaceutical text. Good teacher makes all the difference. Their relationship had evolved far beyond the forced arrangement that brought them together. Love had grown from intellectual partnership, mutual respect, and shared purpose. They worked together with the kind of synchronicity that comes from truly understanding and appreciating each other's strengths. The anniversary of their forced marriage arrived in early autumn. Luther's mandatory year of town residence was officially complete, freeing him to return to his beloved mountains if he chose. Instead, he used the occasion to propose a real marriage, one chosen freely by both parties. "Marry me again," he said simply. "This time because we want to, not because someone forced us." "Yes," Celia replied without hesitation. Their second wedding ceremony took place in the town square, just like the first. But this time, the gathering was celebratory rather than punitive. Families whose children they had healed attended with genuine joy. Even former skeptics came to witness the union of 2 people who had proven their worth through competence and character. Reverend Mitchell performed the ceremony with obvious pleasure, speaking about love that grows from respect and partnership that strengthens through shared trials. Luther and Celia exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to continue learning together and serving their community with combined wisdom. Their kiss was passionate and unashamed, drawing cheers from the assembled crowd. These were no longer reluctant participants in someone else's scheme, but 2 people who had found perfect partnership against all odds. The medical practice continued thriving throughout the winter. Luther's knowledge of seasonal plant availability helped them maintain effective treatments year-round, while Celia's scientific approach ensured consistent quality and dosage. They began training other interested residents in basic herbal medicine, sharing knowledge that could benefit the entire territory. Toby Morris chronicled their story in a series of articles that were reprinted in newspapers throughout Colorado Territory. His account of how forced marriage had transformed into genuine love and professional partnership inspired similar couples facing social prejudice. Spring brought news that changed everything. Celia announced her pregnancy during their evening study session, setting down her medical journal to share the development that would add new dimension to their partnership. Luther's face lit with joy tempered by protective concern. "You're certain?" Completely certain. The baby should arrive in early autumn. They spent that evening planning modifications to their home and medical practice that would accommodate their growing family. Luther designed additions that would provide separate living quarters while maintaining their professional workspace. Celia researched prenatal care that combined traditional wisdom with modern medical knowledge. The announcement sparked celebration throughout Clearwater Junction. Children who had been healed by their treatments looked forward to playing with the baby. Adults who had overcome their prejudices now saw Luther and Celia's child as symbol of the town's own transformation. On a warm evening in late spring, Luther sat in their expanded garden reading advanced medical texts aloud while Celia tended plants that would become medicines for their community. Their child moved actively in her womb, already part of a family built on learning, love, and service to others. The mountain man, who had once been barely literate, now possessed knowledge that saved lives. The isolated widow had found partnership that honored her intelligence and independence. Together, they had transformed not just themselves, but an entire town's understanding of what was possible when prejudice gave way to truth.